Catholic pilgrims as we learn from one of Spain's most revered saints, Saint Teresa of Avila, a spirited doctor of the Church. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week as we read from Saint Teresa's book, The Interior Castle. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, depending on when you are listening, Catholic pilgrims. So, when my family was in Portugal, one day our plans were completely thwarted by an unexpected strike at the place we were going to see. I told you how we had climbed to the top of this very steep mountain in order to tour a palace, and when we got to the top, fully out of breath, it was closed because the workers were on strike. So we're standing up there with a bunch of other very disappointed and angry people trying to figure out what we were going to do. It wasn't like we could just easily get back to Lisbon because we had to ride public transportation. And so the remedy was to hire an Uber driver and have him drive us, very cheaply, I might add, to some other places that we wanted to see. And he was parked right up there by the palace. He had room enough for all of us, and so we jumped into his car and away we went. And he was a very friendly guy, young guy. His English was fairly good, so we were able to chat with him as he drove us to the most western point of the European continent. It's called Capa da Roca, and really beautiful views up there. At one point, while we were driving along, my husband asked him if he was married, and he said, "Yes, I've been married for 7 years." And so then my husband asked the normal follow-up question, "Do you have any children?" To which he commented, "No, we don't have any kids. We have dogs." And he said that his dogs were his children. He went on to say that he and his wife like to travel, and the way he was talking made it seem like he and his wife thought kids would just get in the way of their lifestyle. And so it really sounded like they just didn't want to have children. I don't know all the details, and I'm passing a lot of judgment, but I've heard similar talk from other young people who are married and don't want to have kids. And so it's not a new response from the younger generation. Now, I can't be sure, but his attitude was one where he and his wife didn't want to burden their marriage with kids, quote unquote burden, because they wanted to be free and easy to just do whatever they wanted. And people like to say that dogs are their children and equate them to kids. And then at the same time, they also realize, though they may not say it, that dogs don't require the same level of attention and care than children do. Anyway, this is a whole soapbox I could get on because it's one of my greatest pet peeves. And when people call pets children, pets are pets and children are children. And to equate the two is to degrade the human dignity of children. But that's a topic for another day because I could literally go on and on. And yes, before you write me, I realize that their situation may be that they can't have children, but his attitude and comments are typical of people that just don't want to bring children into a marriage. That's part of the purpose of marriage. It wasn't the attitude or comments of people that are trying and really struggling to conceive and want to have children. Anyway, later at lunch, my husband and our oldest daughter had an interesting conversation about when is it too soon to offer advice, correction, or witness to the truth of the gospel. And so we're going to discuss that on the other side. So our topic for today is when to charitably call someone out or offer correction or charitable advice. And people are all over the map about this, and St. Teresa is going to give us some very interesting insight and something that I think we can all take to heart. Today we will be finishing our travel through the first mansion, so congratulations on that milestone. And our readings are from the first mansion, chapter 2, Numbers 18 through 22. But first, a word from our sponsor, Amazing Grace Pilgrimages. In 2020, before the world shut down, I went on pilgrimage to the Holy Land with Amazing Grace pilgrimages. And during that trip, Lori, the pilgrimage coordinator, and I started planning where we would go next together. And I told her that Italy had been a place that I had always dreamed about seeing someday. I didn't used to think about it in a Catholic way, but now I do. And so we made that dream a reality and planned a pilgrimage to Italy this year, October 23rd through the 31st, 2023. And I recently heard someone say that vacation is what you do when you want to escape life. Pilgrimage is what you do when you really want to come alive. And I think that is so true. When we go on vacation, we want to relax, sleep on the beach, and just check out. But pilgrimage isn't about rest, as in sleeping and just laying around. It's about intentionally going to encounter God. And in Italy, we will be visiting amazing churches. We're going to have Sunday Mass in Rome. We're going to attend a papal audience. We're going to visit where St. Francis and St. Clare lived in Assisi and visit the shrine of my patron saint, St. Maria Goretti in Nettuno. And there's so much more I could mention, but I just don't have the time. But I am taking 20 people on this pilgrimage. It's going to be a very small, intimate pilgrimage, and I would love for you to come join me. So if you are interested, follow the links in the show notes and be sure to follow Amazing Grace Pilgrimages on Instagram and Facebook. Now, on to our readings, Numbers 18 through 22. Do not trouble yourselves, my daughters, with cares which do not concern you. You must notice that the struggle with the demons continues through nearly all the mansions of this castle. True, in some of them, the guards, which, as I explained, are the powers of the soul, have strength for the combat. But we must be keenly on the watch against the devil's arts, lest he deceive us in the form of an angel of light. He creeps in gradually, in numberless ways, and does us much harm, though we do not discover it until too late. As I said elsewhere, he works like a file, secretly and silently wearing its way. I will give you some examples to show you how he begins his wiles. For instance, a nun has such a longing for penance as to feel no peace unless she is tormenting herself in some way. This is good in itself. But suppose that the prioress has forbidden her to practice any mortifications without special leave, and the sister, thinking that in such a meritorious cause she may venture to disobey, secretly leads such a life that she loses her health and cannot even fulfill the requirements of her rule. You see how this show of good ends? Another nun is very zealous about religious perfection. This is very right, but may cause her to think every small fault she sees in her sisters a serious crime, and to watch constantly whether they do anything wrong, that she may run to the prioress to accuse them of it. At the same time, maybe she never notices her own shortcomings because of her great zeal about other people's religious observance, while perhaps her sisters, not seeing her intention, but only knowing of the watch she keeps on them, do not take her behavior in good part. The devil's chief aim here is to cool the charity and lessen the mutual affection of the nuns, which would injure them seriously. Be sure, my daughters, that true perfection consists in the love of God and our neighbor. And the better we keep both these commandments, the more perfect we shall be. The sole object of our rule and constitutions is to help us to observe these two laws. Indiscreet zeal about others must not be indulged in. It may do us much harm. Let each one look to herself. However, as I have spoken fully on this subject elsewhere, I will not enlarge on it here, and will only beg you to remember the necessity of this mutual affection. Our souls may lose their peace and even disturb other people's if we are always criticizing trivial actions which often are not real defects at all, but we construe them wrongly through ignorance of their motives. See how much it costs to attain perfection? Sometimes the devil tempts nuns in this way about the prioress, which is still more dangerous. Great prudence is then required, for if she disobeys the rule or constitutions, the matter must not always be overlooked, but should be mentioned to her. If, after this, she does not amend, the superior of the order should be informed of it. It is true charity to speak in this case, as it would be if we saw our sisters commit a grave fault. To keep silence for fear that speech would be a temptation against charity would be that very temptation itself. However, I must warn you seriously not to talk to each other about such things, lest the devil deceive you. He would gain greatly by your doing so, because it would lead to the habit of detraction. Rather, as I said, state the matter to those whose duty it is to remedy it. Thank God our custom here of keeping almost perpetual silence gives little opportunity for such conversations. Still, it is well to stand ever on our guard. Before our readings, I was talking to you about the conversation my husband and our oldest daughter had at lunch after riding around with our very friendly Uber driver. And as a family, we were talking about how nice he was and how it seemed like he was meant to be there at that time for us. We all really enjoyed his company and his willingness to drive us around and be patient with us, because he would even stop off and let us take pictures. And he took us on the more scenic paths and didn't charge us more. He was just very attentive and did a very good job. And then the conversation got around to him not really wanting kids. And my husband said, I wish I could have said something to him about that, but it was our first time meeting and it wasn't really appropriate. To which my daughter said, well, sometimes all you get is one chance to leave an impression with people. It's not always bad to say something important, even if you've just met someone. And so from here, we discussed this in detail. And now, like I said before, people are all over the map on the subject of, quote unquote, calling someone out or offering their opinion or criticism or advice. And it wasn't like we wanted to call this guy out, and we didn't know his whole story or anything like that, but it just got us thinking about when to offer maybe constructive criticism or, when you have to admonish somebody or offer advice. And so whenever I write about this topic on social media, about, when to charitably offer criticism or admonish the sinner, I will inevitably get people that say, well, just let your actions speak for themselves. And then they will usually quote some variation of a quote attributed to St. Francis, which goes something like, preach the gospel always, use words if necessary. Now, it's a good thought. However, the problem with this quote is that St. Francis never actually said it. At least we don't have any record of him ever saying it. It's been attributed to him. I don't know why exactly, but it has been repeated millions of times and always in defense of never actually sharing the words of the gospel. And again, I'm not saying the quote is necessarily wrong or bad, but that's usually when it's used as when people don't want to speak up in some way. And sometimes, yes, our actions are witness enough to the gospel. I mean, there we were in this Uber driver's car and we were a traveling family. My husband and I were showing him that, yes, in fact, you can travel with your kids and it's a wonderful and beautiful thing. It's not as easy and cheap as if you just do it, you and your spouse, but you do make lasting memories with your loved ones, and that deepens your bond as a family. So, yeah, maybe our actions of just being a traveling family was good enough. Maybe it did plant a seed. I don't know. But I also think my daughter has a point. Sometimes all you get is one chance to make an impression or to say something. Now, Again, this doesn't mean that I think my husband should have gone on a lecture rant about having kids to this guy. That would have been wildly inappropriate and things would have gotten really awkward. But I don't think it would have been necessarily bad when the Uber driver made the comment about how he and his wife wanted to travel, for my husband to say, "Oh, yes, we love to travel too. It's been such a blessing to travel with our kids all over the place. Kids add so much to the mix." And then leave it at that. St. Teresa today is speaking to her other sisters in the convent and discussing the topic of when to concern yourself with cares pertaining to other people. And right off the bat, she tells us, don't trouble yourself with cares that don't concern you. And this isn't just something that religious sisters struggle with. We all struggle with this. And the reason why we all struggle with this is because it is so much easier to look at other people and point out what they are doing wrong than to look at ourselves. And it gets so bad that we point out like the little tiny things. She even talks about that. We look for the trivial things. We look for the just small nuisances that we notice and then start to nag people about. And sometimes we think we are being noble and righteous by trying to help others live a very religious life. But St. Teresa tells us what can happen. She says of people focused on others, at the same time, maybe she, another sister, never notices her own shortcomings because of her great zeal about other people's religious observances. She goes on to say, the devil's chief aim here is to cool the charity and lessen the mutual affection of the nuns, which would injure them seriously. So we have to make sure that we are correcting people for love of them and love of God, not because we want to make ourselves feel more righteous. You know, if my husband had said something or I had said something about having children, I wouldn't want to do it because I'm trying to prove a point about, look at us, we have kids, we travel with kids. I do really feel like couples that choose to forego having children and leave that aside in their marriage really come to regret it. And I've met tons and tons of couples that are married that decided not to have children, and then once it was too late, they deeply, deeply regretted it. And I can see their pain. And so I don't want that for this guy. I mean, I barely know him, but I still don't want that for him because children are such a joy. And sadly, our culture and the message that is permeated throughout the world is that children are a burden. You shouldn't have kids. You'll be more free. If you don't have them, they'll just be a drag on your marriage. And so I want to combat that message for love of people. And it's so important that we charitably correct people. I know if my husband would have said something, he wouldn't have gone on a lecture rant. I know he would have said it very gently and with a smile on his face so as not to seem like he was, wagging his finger at this guy. St. Teresa tells us also that we can't be nagging people over trivial actions, because that causes not only us to lose our peace, but for them to lose their peace when we are forever nagging at people over just, the littlest things. Sometimes that's just how people are, and we just need to let that go and realize that people are going to do stuff that annoy us and bother us and get on our nerves. But when it comes to big issues that really matter, we should speak up lest someone fall into mortal sin or do something that is really bad for themselves. And that's what she says. If we see somebody doing something really bad, she kind of gives the example of, if you see the prioress doing something that she's not supposed to, yes, we should speak up and we should try to go and correct that and amend that problem. But I will tell you, people are very, very hesitant to do this. And I think there are two reasons. One, we ourselves, we don't want to be called out because it makes us uncomfortable, because we all like to think we're perfect. And two, we don't want to call others out and deal with the friction we will most likely get, because rare is the person who accepts any kind of criticism well. But I do think that St. Teresa gives us some good tips to keep in mind when considering whether to say something or not. Number one, she says, look at yourself. Look to yourself. She tells her fellow sisters, let each one look to herself. And so we need to make sure that we are checking ourselves and not to present ourselves as a perfect person. Number two is to practice prudence. Is the matter trivial or is it a serious matter? Is the timing right? Can you say what you want to say in such a way that sounds like encouragement rather than criticism? I'm sure if my husband would have said something, it would have been something along the lines of, oh man, we love traveling with our kids. We take our kids everywhere and we always have in our marriage. And yeah, it's a little bit harder, but it's such a joy to have kids come along with us. I know he would have said something along those lines. And that would have been more of an encouragement rather than, him criticizing or lecturing. And number three, seek their good for love of them, not for prideful reasons like, oh, everybody needs to do everything like I do it. That would be very prideful. And so you need to ask yourself, am I going to charitably correct because this is a serious issue and I feel like they may be committing a grave fault? Or am I just being petty and I need to let it go and maybe give them the benefit of the doubt? So it is a fine balance to walk, Catholic pilgrims, knowing when to offer constructive criticism or charitable admonishment. It definitely takes practice and prudence for sure, and rarely does it get accepted well. I will say that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but the most important thing to remember is that we will be much better equipped to help people if we are working to better ourselves, accept criticism ourselves, if we are going to confession, and if we seek the good of others for their sake and not for our own. So that is all for today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you back here soon. Until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.